I have my Science is Magic That Works shirt because it's true right now. Um, so, before I actually really more get into the video, I had a couple of props I wanted to put up in the background, but depending on stuff, they need a little bit of explaining. So first off, and I have no idea what other video I'd ever use this in, I have this very nice globe. Spin. It's not the best, unfortunately, but I like it. It's going to go on the back here. Go. And then I also have a book that's called The Short History of the World. The story of mankind from prehistory to the modern day. I found this in the garage, in all honesty, and I'm just like, this is coming with me. And then to top it off, I have an apple. And partially because, of course, one of the more famous versions of what the fruit of knowledge is, of course, an apple. Although science dictates it was probably a pomegranate, in all honesty, given that that was the more type of fruit that would have been in, like, where supposedly where the Garden of Eden could have been. New character, finally, we kind of get to see what he looks like, and he seems to have a hat that looks like an apple, so that's why we have an apple. So I have a book, a globe, and an apple. I feel like a teacher. I don't want to be a teacher. God, no. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I actually did a video that was about how awesome the different archaeologists of Ohara were, the librarians and everything at Ohara, about Clover and Olvia, like all of them and everything, and how the fact that the world government was so freaking scared of these archaeologists that they not only tried to burn the books, burn the library, blow up the island, and basically probably killed all of the different archaeologists in general if they weren't already dead. Well, they shot Clover before he could say the name of a kingdom, which we find out was a very important thing in this chapter. And I love the fact that it's basically like, yeah, no, they were also scared of these archaeologists. And we find out more about Clover in this chapter that just makes me think he's even more badass, which is fine in my opinion. And we see, you know, how just terrified they are in general of the archaeologists and the knowledge that is on Ohara, which clearly, from what we learned in this chapter, to a degree, they had every right to be terrified of it, for multiple reasons. But we also learned, you know, we also saw, I talked about in that video, if you want to go watch the video, just type in Ohara on my channel and you'll probably find it. It's like the only other one I've done that I talked about that. We see that, but we also see the fact that they're so terrified of these archaeologists, and the fact that one little 8-year-old girl managed to escape the island terrifies them so much. They put a 79 million berry bounty on a little girl, on Robin. And like they chase her for 20 years, and of course we know eventually she ends up with the Straw Hats, and of course you know everything that happens at Innis Lobby and everything, and how we see Robin's will, which is also kind of Ohara's will, kind of continues on in that way. And we find out more in this chapter, of course, that Ohara's will has survived even more than just Robin, which I will get to. But first, I need to do some updates on my Vegapunk charts. So before, I had been having it be that Vegapunk was, the main Stella body, the main body, was represented by Doc Brown in my charts. This is no longer true because now we know what he actually looks like, and there's a much better representation. But first, I want to talk about how his because we see him first in the flashback, and then we see him in like his present persona. And in the flashback, we of course see that he has this like huge freaking head. Is he part of the big brain tribe or something like that? Because there's long necks and there's snake necks and long arms and long legs and 3-eyed and everything. So is there like a big brain tribe and that's what he's from, or did he eat the brain fruit or the genius fruit? I don't know. I'm assuming we may find out one way or another. If anyone ate it, it would have been Vegapunk. Although then again, if you have the brain fruit, which are like full on, I don't know, would that be a paramecia or a zoan? Because I don't think it would be a logia. But probably be a zoan since it is technically alive. But I don't know how to work that. But when I saw the spoilers for the chapter and I saw that image of him, because I'm a Disney nerd, Disney/Pixar nerd, and I already use Eve for one of the for Edison. I already use Eve for Edison on this in my charts. I immediately flashed to so several months ago there was of course the Lightyear movie that came out that's supposed to be the movie about Buzz Lightyear, who is of course where the toy for Toy Story comes from, where that that action figure that the movie that comes from that movie. And years ago, and back when Toy Story was first coming out, when the movie, shortly after the first movie came out, they had a TV series that they had that ran that was called Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. I've talked about it before. I talked about it in the different Toy Story videos that I've done. And of course, I believe I talked about in the Lightyear review that I did. But one of the things that we see is, Buzz has lots of these different villains that he has to deal with. And one of the villains that he has to fight is a woman whose name is Gravitina. And I instantly thought of her because she has this large head that has its own gravitational pull. And I'm like, I saw the picture of Vegapunk and that instantly popped into my mind. And I'm like, well, that's definitely going in when I discuss this. And one of the other things is she also doesn't like rejection. And the only reason I bring this up is because there's other funny pictures involved. She has this crush on Buzz. And there's also like an evil version of Buzz that roams around at some point in time, and him and her get along great. To a degree, I'm sure he backstabs her at some point, but she tries to, seduce the real Buzz Lightyear. And because he rejects her, because he doesn't want to go out on a date with her, she gives him a large head as revenge. And then he has to walk around Star Command like this huge head with like all the little Martian men, looping around it like random objects being gravitationally pulled to it, which the way that science works, that large of an object would not actually result in that, but it also depends on, I guess, the density of it, but I don't know. It was funny. Eventually by the end of the episode, he gets rid of it and he's back to normal, but I just wanted to point that out. For like what I thought of when I saw the initial Vegapunk for what we see in the flashback. And then we get into what he more currently looks like, which we don't see until the very end of the chapter. And what we see at the end of the chapter, I'll get into more of what like Shaka and Robin talk about in a minute, but I wanted to go over this to update my various charts for Vegapunk, of course. We see that, of course, he is now obviously based off of Albert Einstein. And it's based off of the famous picture of Albert Einstein where he's, sticking his tongue out because he's the world's most renowned scientist. And what do you want your picture to be? Thank you, Albert Einstein. But we also see that, because in the flashback, we see 22 years ago that we get between him and Dragon and stuff and what happens on Ohara, which I'll get to. We see that, his head is much, much larger and everything. And now that we see him in the present time, his head isn't exactly normal size, but it's like, part of it looks like it's literally been like chopped off. And then he's wearing basically, the top half of it is basically an apple. And yes, I know the book fell. And it's like the top part of an apple. Which I'm sitting there going, okay, how did that work? How did he get that? What did he do to his own head? Did he like slice part of his own head off? Did he actually pull a Dr. Finkelstein from Nightmare Before Christmas and actually pull out chunks of his own brain and put them into the other Vegapunk clones, into the different ones and the other bodies, the satellites? Is that what he actually did? Did I actually get that right? Which, if I did, that's awesome. But I'm sure someone else also talked about that at some point in time. But Is that what happened? Did he like literally pull out parts of his own brain and then put them into them? Because we see that Shaka has the same memories as Vegapunk, has as the original Vegapunk. Um, because Shaka is the one telling the story to the Straw Hats. So does that mean that all of the different variations have these same memories? But then Atlas didn't say anything to Luffy or in his group. But then again, Atlas had other things to do, I guess. Um, and you would think that well, then again, Lilith is much more on the evil side. Shaka is the one that has logic, so him talking to the Straw Hats about this stuff, specifically Robin, makes a lot of sense. But so what I use in regards to my Vegapunk representation for the time being in regards to the Stella body will now be the Albert Einstein with his tongue sticking out and an apple hat on his head, because I can. And Albert Einstein was born March 14th, 1879, and died on April 18th, 1955. So about 4 days before what is technically my birthday. But a long years before then. Yeah. And of course, he's one of the most famous scientists in the world in, recent years and everything. There's, you still got Stephen Hawking and everything. He passed. Yeah, Stephen Hawking died a little while ago. I'm like, yeah, no, he died. But, we see all of that. But yeah, Albert Einstein was kind of this, he was born in Germany, and then eventually, of course, he immigrated into the U.S. and everything, which is where we have like the Einstein visa and everything. But now I get to talk about Ohara, and I am so happy that like I did that Ohara video several weeks ago, because now I've got a lot of that fresh enough in my mind that I'm like, oh yeah, no, I remember exactly how, like, or pretty close to how this all went anyway. And of course, we find out in this chapter that Ohara's will lives on in much more than just Robin. And, we find out that, Clover was even more awesome than we thought. We find out that he was friends with Vegapunk. We see like we get like these back and forths where we see like Shaka talking to Robin and everything. And I love the fact that it's like when Robin starts crying, Sanji is just like, how dare you make Robin cry? Let my feet go so I can kick your butt. It's like, calm down, Sanji. It's not Shaka's intention to make Robin cry. That is not his intention. But what we see is, of course, him talking to Robin, and like we see Nami and the rest of the crew are just like, oh my god, the rest of the ones that are there are just like, oh my god, they eliminated an island just because of that and everything. Why are you telling us this? I'm like, did Robin never tell you guys her actual backstory? I mean, like, I know that when, like, they're standing at, in his lobby and everything, the Straw Hats are here to save her and everything, and, like, Luffy's yelling at her, just, tell me you want to die and we'll leave. We'll stop this and everything, but if you say you want to live, then we're going to save you. And we see all of that. And we know that Robin has, like, the whole flashback there and everything with what happens with the Buster Call and all of that. So, was it that... Well, obviously, she's not just going to stand there and then, like, explain across this ravine with the CP9 agents standing there listening in. And, like, it's not like she's going to stand there and, like, then, like, explain across. It was like, well, I was a little girl, and I grew up on an island called Ohara, and they had this giant tree that was a library, and nobody on the island liked me, except for the archaeologists. And my mom left when I was, like, 2. 4, whatever. It was just like, she's not going to stand there and like say all of that. But, at some point in time, I'm assuming maybe Robin sat down and like maybe told the rest of the Straw Hats some of what happened. But given what we see in this chapter, that implies that no, she didn't. So, because they don't seem to know everything that happened. I mean, like, she may have told them that like her island was destroyed by a Buster Call, which, they would understand. They've seen what a Buster Call does with what happened to Enies Lobby and everything. But so there's like that concept, but I don't know exactly where that falls in regards to whether or not Robin explained everything to them at some point in time. And like, what did Brooke read? Did she sit everybody down when they were on their way, like sailing away from Water 7 and everything after they had this party? She's like, okay, I'm going to sit you guys down and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened in my backstory. Like she does. Is there like a moment where like all the Straw Hats, like after a new crew member joins each time, do they just all sit down and explain each other's backstories to each other? Clearly not, because Sanji never mentioned anything about the Cherma. Does he have to now explain his own backstory again to Robin and Zoro and Frankie and Usopp because of what happened in Topland? I don't know, but that would be funny. Just like, okay, time for Straw Hat backstory hour. Everybody get out their tissues. Zoro, why aren't you crying? I'm drunk. That checks. Is that what happens? Well, then again, like Luffy only just told everyone of his, the rest of his full dream was, so probably not. Luffy, well, I had two brothers. Maybe that's a new thing, that the Straw Hat group therapy. Straw Hat group therapy is what they need to do. Admittedly, they probably all need therapy to some degree. Although, then again, we don't know, as I stated, we don't know anything about, like, Brooks' childhood. He may have had a very happy childhood. He may have been fine all the way up until he left his country to go and, join a pirates. Join musical pirates. Jimbei, fishman, general problems that come along with just being that in this world, unfortunately. But from what we learn about Clover is, of course, he was just more badass than we already knew. We learned that he like sailed around and ended up being captured by. He was like captured like 10 times by the Marines and everything. Like he was just he was just obsession with the Void Century, and he's fueled his adventurous lifestyle is like kind of the way that it's put in the translation that I have. And he was searching for relevant text all over the world, and he just like sailed around, and like the Marines incarcerated him like more than 10 times. Before he finally settled down on Ohara. And we see him in the flashback, and he's got like his boat has Clover written on it, and he's got like, it's his hairstyle, but it's a little bit more elaborate, I guess. He's like, my name is Clover, therefore I will wear clovers on my head. Which I love. But he's, the most, he's the world's most famous archaeologist at that point in time and everything, from what we see from the flashbacks and everything. And of course, from what we see in the flashbacks even more is, and I talked about this in the Ohara video that I made a little while ago, that, we see all of the archaeologists like throwing the books out of the windows when the library is on fire, because their answer to that is, well, the books have a better chance of surviving if we throw them in the water than if they burn to dust, if they burn to ash, because water damage is much easier to do, and it's probably fresh water, so it's not like salt water and everything. And the lake looked pretty clean, in all honesty, so hopefully, that helped with preserving the books and everything. And it didn't look like there was any like fish or anything in the water from what we could tell. But we see them throwing all of the books out of the library and everything. And throughout that, that's what we see throughout that. And it was just like, we see like both Olvia and Clover like praying, please let some of this knowledge survive and everything. And of course, we see as, we get the flashback between Robin and her mom in this chapter, where Robin's like, no, I want to stay with you. And Olvia's like, no, you need to go, you need to live and everything. And we see that. And we see Saul running with him, Ohara fought against the world, your mom's a wonderful woman, and Ohara's a wonderful place, and you need to live to keep part of that alive. And we see that with Saul in that regard and everything. And it's basically implied that all the rest of the archaeologists died during this time frame, because we see later when all of the Marines come back to the island to like investigate to make sure that everybody's dead and that the library is burned and everything. Once the library is burned, it's gone. We in the chapter we see that there is very little remnants left of the library. We see it was either, well, in all honesty, we'll find out who probably did this, but someone took like probably part of the tree itself and like jabbed it into the ground and like carved Ohara on it, so that way as like a grave marker, as like a tribute to the island and everything. And that's where we see Vegapunk and Dragon because like more confirmation that Dragon and Vegapunk know each other, and like at least they knew each other at this point in time. I love the fact that Dragon's like, "Hey, come work for me. I'm building a revolutionary army," and Vegapunk's basic answer is like, "No, I'm not going to come work for your broke ass. I'm going to go work for the world government, and then I can find Marines, probably Sword. In all honesty, Kobe and Helmeppo and whoever else, and Prince Geist, whatever his name is, and the others that are part of Sword, along with, Drake and anybody else that's part of Sword. And, wherever you want to send the theories of Law and Aokiji or, Kuzan and everything being part of Sword and everything, wherever you want to send that. But we see a lot of, that kind of explains it, but Vegapunk's just like, no, I'm not going to come work for you. The world's government has more money. Although, even at this point in time, we see both Atlas and Lilith, angry about the fact that, their research funds keep drying up and everything. And of course, like, we know the excess of the riches that the Celestial Dragons have. And clearly at some point they paid Vegapunk to try to recreate dragons, which to a degree he was successful with, but he either considered them failures or they just weren't good enough and the Celestial Dragons didn't want them, or whatever the case was. That's never explained, I don't think. Well, it doesn't matter. Both of the dragons are dead now. One was decapitated by Zoro. The other one was, I believe, killed by Kinemon. So, yeah. Punk Hazard. But we see that. We see all of this other stuff that, like, Vegapunk has been able to do and everything. We see what the pacifistas can do. We see, the Seraphim at this point in time. We saw what the Shark Seraphim could do. In the previous chapter, we've seen what the Mihawk Seraphim can do and the Boa Seraphim can do, Seraph can do in those cases. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what else Vegapunk has done. But then again, as I stated when I did the Seraphim video, or, like, do all of the pacifistas and the Seraphim just literally have, like, this switch that they can flip, that Vegapunk can flip, or one of the Vegapunks can flip, that would just be like, oh, you no longer obey the world government. If they tell you to attack citizens, or if they tell you to attack certain pirates or certain people, you don't attack them anymore. That type of thing. It's like, no, you now obey Dragon, or you now obey, I don't know, the Straw Hats or something like that. Because Vegapunk at the end is just like, hey, you're Dragon's kid to Luffy. So that's just funny, which I'll get to. But, we just learn more about that, Clover was even more awesome than we thought. And then, of course, we have this moment where Vegapunk and Dragon are talking, and he's like, well, all these giants are here, and they're taking the books away. And Dragon's like, yeah, no, it's fine. I talked to their captain. He was a man covered in bandages, and he's taking the books back to Elbath. And we get this moment where, we cut back to, a little bit in the flashback. We see that, well, first of all, we see Robin crying several times throughout this chapter, which is like, it is very, it's hard to look at because, like, we've seen her cry before. We saw her very specifically crying during the, the I want to live and everything that we see at Ennis Lobby. We see how angry she gets when stuff happened in Wano and stuff like that. Different things along those lines. But we also see that in this case, it's not tears of anger, it's tears. I would go with somewhere of just like, she hasn't talked about Ohara for a long time, so it's definitely like some of it's tears of sadness and stuff, and just tears of remembering people that she hasn't thought about very much in a long time, her mother and Clover and Saul and all the rest of the archaeologists and everything. And, just how much she probably misses them. And, I love the fact that it's just like any of the Straw Hats are just like, you made Robin cry. Stop doing that. Release these shoes now is what we get. It's just like, calm down. And, we find out that Vegapunk at some point went to Elbath. We find out during this flashback that, this is when Dragon's building his, his army. We also find out that apparently Dragon doesn't like fighting in this case. He doesn't seem to like the concept of war, which, considering the fact that he's building a revolutionary army, that seems counterproductive, but unfortunately, and this is something that we've seen even now with what's going on in Ukraine and everything, that was just like, you can want peace all you want, but you still have to defend your people. And we've seen some of that. And I've stated before, I have a friend at work that we talk about this stuff, and I stated before, just like, I wish that it could be solved without fighting, but unfortunately, that's not the way that the world works, and that's clearly not the way that the One Piece world works, considering how many times we've seen where, the bad person's in charge, what happens in Alabasta, what happens in Dressrosa, what happened in Wano, take your pick, where some bad person has ended up in charge or is trying to take control, as what happened as what happened in Alabasta and everything. And in Skypiea as well, if you want to go for that being like a representation of the rest of the series. But you still have to fight back. And, being a pacifist isn't always the only thing that you can do. One moment, the dog is trying to dig on my mom's bed. You're not an archaeologist. Stop that. He's trying to be an archaeologist on my mom's bed. I can assure you, Grandma does not have anything in there that would be considered an ancient artifact. He went to the groomer yesterday, so he's much less fluffy, but still cute. But, in some cases, being a pacifist is not always the best way to go. Unfortunately, I wish some cases it was better, but that's where I tend to fall on things. But, we find out that, and this is where Dragon doesn't have his face tattoo at this point in time. It's still before he gets that. We see him wearing like a band on his leg that has like that tattoo on it, but his face doesn't have it. We still don't know what that tattoo means. But we know that in that time frame, within that year is when, so about 21 years ago would have been when it would form. So still, like, Luffy's not born yet. So we know that Luffy was born during the time frame that the Revolutionary Army had been started. After it had been started, because we see him talking about, like, Dragon and Ivankov and, Kuma and everything had become part of the Revolutionary Army and everything. But we also find out that Vegapunk, before he had all of his satellite bodies, ended up being able to sneak his way, because he asked the Giants if he could take the books with him to Punk Hazard, but he's just like, no. Then if the government shows up and does any type of investigations around it or anything like that, they're going to find these books and they're going to ask how I had them, and that's not going to go well. So he finds out that they were taken to Elbath. And what ends up happening is we find out that Vegapunk talked to the man who was the captain of the Giants, the man covered in bandages. And we learn that he allowed Vegapunk to read all of the different books and everything that were on Elbath that were from Ohara and everything. And, Vegapunk memorized it and everything. So he's probably got like an eidetic memory. And everything, and Shaka's like, well, it's all in my head. And I've continued their research, because he's explaining that, like, during the time frame that Clover was out, adventuring and everything and finding all of this information, that they managed to, that he found all of these different documents, that they had this theory about, about the ancient kingdom, about a certain kingdom as it keeps being referred to. I still don't know the name of it. Robin, he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you the name, because he probably doesn't know the name himself or whatever, or maybe he does, but, Clover knew the name, because they shot him before he could say it, so Clover knows the name of the kingdom. And so it's probably written down somewhere. But, the way that we see that is, Vegapunk is just like, well, I got to go and talk to their captain and everything, and I went to Elbath and read everything and memorized it and all of that. And we see Robin crying, and she's like, that giant captain, he's called Saul, isn't he? And we see her, and it's, it's the happy tears and everything. And, Vegapunk's like, well, he's in hiding right now. Shaka's like, well, he's in hiding right now, so I can't confirm anything. And we just see Robin smiling and everything, like, thank you, Dr. Vegapunk. Thank you for not letting Ohara's sacrifice be in vain. I love how they do that. It just and it confirms that, at least 22 years ago, it at least confirms that Saul survived that. And the fact that he's in hiding at the moment implies that he is still alive. And as much as Vegapunk is probably very smart, I highly doubt he read all of those books in one sitting, so he's probably made several different trips to Elbath at different times in order to read through all of these different books and documents and everything like that the librarians had managed to throw out into the water. And then, of course, the giants gathered up. And then, of course, because Saul survived, which is just really happy. And okay, so I'm working on a One Piece fan fiction right now, and it's not posted anywhere, so I can't technically verify this, but I am working on a One Piece fan fiction right now, and part of what I put into it is that Saul survived what happened on Ohara. I also added that Olvia survived, but that does not seem to be confirmed here by any degree, so I'm not going to go with that Olvia survived. But in my fanfic, I had it that Olvia survived as well, that like Clover locked her in the basement of the building and she survived part of that area. Also, it implies that in the actual chapter, it implies the fact that it was like, well, they saved the books and everything like that, and then considering the poneglyphs are kind of nigh indestructible, the giants probably have that poneglyph that was on Ohara as well, on Elbath as well. So they may also have the last red poneglyph, the road poneglyph, but they may also have this other poneglyph. So we'll see where that goes. But in the fanfic, I had written that it was Saul survived because he ended up being basically thawed out between like all the heat and everything from all the fires that had burned. And Ohara seemed to be in a rather temperate, tropical-ish looking climate and everything, so he probably thawed out that way. And the fact that he's covered in bandages is probably because he probably had very severe frostbite, given the fact that the last time we saw him, he was being frozen alive by Aokiji. And Kiji is one that allowed Robin to survive. Whether or not he knew that Saul would survive is left up for debate. But the fact that Ohara's will lives on, and more than just Robin, that Saul's will lives on in Saul himself, but also in Robin, and continuing on with where the will of Ohara goes with that's a very nice thing to have. Also, I had it in the fanfic that like eventually Robin does get to see Saul again and her mom, and she's just like, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you," and everything. You just get like she's just like so happy to see them again. Clover still dies because he'd been shot in the fanfic, or he'd been shot in canon, so I was gonna have him die anyway. But yeah, in the fanfic, I had that planned out that no, Saul would survive, and he's basically been in hiding. Yes, I didn't have him go to Elbath, I had him go somewhere else, but basically I had a very similar thing happen in the fanfic where it's just like him and Olvia gathered up all the books out of the lake, and then like they dried everything out, and then like they hid the books and the poneglyph somewhere else until they could actually find allies that could help them. And in the actual chapter, it's like, okay, so somehow Saul got in contact with the other giants. How did that work? Because Saul states that he's not from Elbath. He tells Robin, I'm not from Elbath. Not all giants are from Elbath. They're much more warlike than I would care for. So that implies that either A, Saul was possibly fibbing about that, and B, that he managed to get in contact with Elbath at some point and then had them, convince them. Maybe some other members of the Giant Warrior Pirates ended up helping them, because we know that not all of them, well, we know that they weren't killed. We know that Dory and Bragi went out looking for, or not Dory and Bragi, that Oimo and Kashi went out looking for Dory and Bragi and everything, 52 years ago or whatever it was at that point in time. But they would have been still captured by the world government at this point in time. So we know that Oimo and Kashi were not part of this group, but there could be other giant warrior pirates, or there could have just been other ones in general that were willing to help Saul. And I would assume that the king and the Prince Loki and everything, whoever the king of the island is at this point in time, were probably okay with this happening, because that's a lot of books and they need a lot of space. Elbath is the island of giants. Yes, this is true, but having all of these different, all these books there is probably something they need to have okayed by the king to a degree. So it's very nice to confirm that no, Saul is alive, and he's in hiding right now. We don't actually see his face in that part of the chapter, but just the way the physical design of him implies that yes, no, this is most likely Saul, and the fact that Vegapunk can't confirm nor deny that implies that no, this is Saul, and we just see how happy Robin looks at this point in time. And then he's just like, come with me, and he just like makes all of their shoes slide across the floor as they're like, come with me, I have something I want to show you. And then we cut to the end of the chapter where we see Luffy and Chopper and Jinbei and, Bonnie and everything. Luffy and Chopper are trying to get the giant robot to move. It's like, maybe it's voice activated, move, and everything. And then just random man shows up, and Luffy has to like pull him out of like this weird half, stuck inside the robot thing. And they're just like, okay, this is Vegapunk. This is the actual main body. And this is where we see him with like the much smaller head and everything. And we see just how angry Bonnie looks as she looks at him. She's like, oh, hey, Bonnie, you grew up really nicely. Or, well, he doesn't say that, but he's like, hey, you grew up and everything. It's nice to see that you're doing well and everything. And Bonnie is not happy to see Vegapunk by any means, but Vegapunk is just completely glossing over that fact because he's like floating there, and Luffy and Chopper are just like, how are you floating? And he's just like, well, if you take your shoes and if you crank the crank on the side down or whatever, and then release it, you'll jump up into the air. And he goes, Gadzooks. So we see that. Also, I think earlier in the chapter, it stated that Vegapunk is like, was he like 42 years old at that point in time when in the flashback that we saw him with Dragon? Let me double check. 43. He's 43 then, so 22 years later, so he would be 65 now, which he still looks like an old man. That still does, to a degree, line up with what we've seen about Karakuri Island, because we don't know how long it's been since he left Karakuri Island. He may have already looked like an old man by the time he left. And of course, as I said, he's like, his head got smaller, and it looks like he chopped part of it off, and now he has like an apple hat on his head. Which an apple is more indicative of, Isaac Newton. But I guess it's just another reference they're throwing in there. Also, as I said earlier, apples are usually a good representation of like the fruit of knowledge and such that we've seen represented as representation of that over the years and everything, particularly from like biblical times and everything like that. Because it's never stated what the fruit is, but I love the fact that it's basically like Clover was just like, he's out gallivanting around and like adventuring and finding documents and everything. Was he just like walking into other libraries and other research facilities around the world, archaeological facilities around the world? They also state that like he made Ohara like a haven for these archaeologists, a sanctuary for them to come to and everything. So he may have found a bunch of this stuff. The Nico family may not have originated on Ohara. It may have been that Clover had found maybe like, Nico Olvia's, mother or father and like brought them back to the island. And then that's where like Olvia and her brother, who I cannot remember her brother's name. Sorry. I can't remember Robin's uncle or aunt's name at the moment. Sorry. Where like Robin's, where, Olvia and her brother were like maybe born that way on the island, as opposed to like, oh, they just, their families lived there for a long time. We don't know. But I just have this image in my head of like Clover going into different like research facilities and libraries and stuff like that. Because they said he was captured, so I highly doubt everything he was doing was legally done. And just going in and going like, what are all these documents about? History? Yoink! They're mine now, and then like leaves. Like, who was that? I don't know. He had a weird Clover on his head. I don't know. I didn't feel like running after him. But apparently he got a hold of a lot of really important documents. And Ohara is known as the island of, scholars and everything like that. And it seems that Clover was part of the reason of that. We know that the library had been there for a long time because, like, the tree itself was, like, over 5,000 years old. And then, they, built the library into the tree and everything. And so we see that, in, Robin's flashbacks and stuff. And this is the first time in a long time that we've gotten, like, throwbacks to Robin's flashbacks. I don't think beyond like maybe in like filler episodes or something like that, we haven't really gotten anything that references Robin's flashback all that often beyond, I think maybe a tiny bit that we get on Zoe, where we see her talking to Inarashi and Nekomamushi. Beyond like a little bit of a flashback there and everything, where it's like she says, oh, it's no, I trust my crew to keep me safe and everything, which is a deliberate reference to Enies Lobby and everything. And of course, throwing in the fact that Lucci and Kaku are probably, going to be arriving on Egghead Island soon. We'll see when the two groups and everything with like Luffy's group and, and Zoro and Brook are sitting on the ship right now, so we'll see what happens whenever they end up getting, interacting with any of the Vegapunks again. Um, um, and I don't blame Shaka at all for like keeping like Nami and Robin and their group like pinned to the floor with their shoes and everything. Although seeing Usopp like bend backwards and forwards was kind of funnier. Like when he like moves their shoes around the floor, they're just like, "Wah!" Which would have been my answer. This is not helpful. Him keeping them pinned to the floor still makes sense given the fact of like, well, they just kind of, Frankie at least kind of possibly did some damage to Shark. But we don't really know about anything else that happened with that. They didn't seem to be doing super well against it, but there's also a lot of other equipment around that could have caused damage to that. And Vegapunk is still probably pretty skeptical of a lot of different pirates that he's probably dealt with over the years. Because I'm highly doubt the Straw Hats are the first ones to arrive on the island or get past Lilith or whatever before she started doing all of that. With all of the like giant mechanical, giant cyborg animals, sea beasts that she has. So we'll see what happens with that, but I like how they did that. I'm glad that I did that Ohara video a little while ago, so I have a lot of that in my head right now. So that made me happy when they started showing that. So we'll see where this goes with Vegapunk and Shaka, and this just gives the Straw Hats another reason to go to Elbath. In all honesty, also the fact that in the Wano arc when Black Maria like has Robin hallucinate her mother and Clover and Saul before has Robin hallucinate that stuff, and of course Robin's able to fight through that because she's like, no, they're dead, and I'm aware of that. The fact that Saul was there as one of the ones that she saw, which of course, as I mentioned to my mom when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm just like, and Saul was Robin's first friend and everything that she had. I mean, like, yeah, she had the archaeologists and stuff and Clover and such, but he was her first friend from outside the island, and such. And she may have also, part of me thinks that Robin at some point when she was little, kind of maybe when she got a little bit older, I'd wondered if like, well, are the archaeologists only my friends because my mom's an archaeologist and because they feel sorry for me? But no, it was they genuinely cared about her. Saul's alive, just gives them another reason to go and go to Elbath now, so Robin can see Saul again. And see all these books that like her mother helped make sure made it into the future, so it's not just Robin that survived with the will, it's also the books and everything. So that's what we have. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is not to stop questioning.